Joining us, two Republicans to talk about their perspectives on policy and the agenda that they hope to achieve in this Congress. We're joined by Representative Mark Walker, Republican of North Carolina, the chair of the Republican Study Committee, and we're also joined by Representative Mark Meadows. He is the head of the Freedom Caucus, chair, also a representative of North Carolina. To both of you gentlemen, thanks for joining us
today.
Good
to be with you, Pedro.
We hear these terms, study committee, freedom. Could you give a perspective of what it actually means to be part of this body, say with the Republican Study Committee? What does that mean?
Sure. Thank you, Pedro. It's a pleasure to be with you guys today. In 1973, the Republican Study Committee was launched. It was a group, a little small caucus at the time, to make sure that the principles of people who believed in conservative ideology would be heard. It was to things of fiscal responsibility, making sure that tax reform was part of the things that were necessary to make sure that we held our government accountable. Through that time, the group has fluctuated at times, but we are privileged to be able to be the chair of the Republican Study Committee, to earn the trust of our colleagues, but also to make sure that we do more than just talk about the needs of this country, of this government, but to make sure that we put action steps in doing something about it.
How many members in your
I believe we have around between 155 and 160 at the current time.
Representative Meadows, the Freedom Caucus, what is that?
Well, about 2 years ago, a group of 9 of us got together that wanted to talk about policy, but also wanted to try to make sure that we voted on a number of issues that Americans believe that Washington, D.C. had forgotten them. And so we established this group, started with 9, grew to approximately 40. And as we looked at that, we believe that we brought a voice to moms and dads, aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews that are on Main Street that feel like that Capitol right there doesn't listen to them. And so it was more about pushing forth a conservative agenda that actually promoted job growth. And when we look at that, I think the key component of that is that as we work together, you have 2 rules in the House Freedom Caucus. You got to be able to say yes to your leadership, and you got to be able to say no to your leadership. And sometimes that can be very difficult, but it's all about representing the will of the people.
And so as for your viewers at home, you can call and ask questions of these gentlemen on the phone lines, 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, and 202-748-8002 for independents. Does that mean that both your various groups will look the same at an issue on every instance?
Sometimes we do. I mean, in fact, Chairman Walker and I are working very closely together, both on the repeal and replacement of the Affordable Care Act, as well as tax reform. And so when you look at those issues, it's a group of conservatives getting together, and maybe the tactics that we employ to try to get that accomplished are different, but certainly we're many times of one mind on policy.
He said sometimes you say yes and no to leadership. How often does leadership say yes to the various principles that you want to propose?
Well, that's a work in progress, we'll put it that way. But there are many things that we agree on, certainly with the Freedom Caucus, specifically in the areas of fiscal responsibility, things of budgeting. And I believe that the more we're on the same page, the more we're for the American people.
And go back to the leadership business. Do they agree with you on many issues? Do they disagree with you? And what has happened when you go to the House Speaker Ryan and the other members of the leadership concerning issues?
I think part of our job is to make sure that we're representing the people to the fullest extent that's possible. Now, sometimes leadership's not always going to agree with us, but at the same time, we don't start from an adversarial position. We're proactive. But we understand that in Washington, there's going to be some disagreements, and having to maneuver and taking the right approach to eventually be effective is certainly one of our goals.
Again, our guest joining us, there's a story in Politico this morning about your both groups, and it deals with the topic of health care. I'll just read a line from it, saying that the House Freedom Caucus and a number of the Republican study committees want to see an aspect when it comes to the Affordable Care Act to add a replacement provisions to a repeal bill dubbed Repeal Plus. Could you give an explanation of what that means?
Yeah, I think Chairman Walker and I have worked together to try to make sure that we not only repeal, but that we look at a replacement plan. Now, what's happened, and our position has been, you really need to vote on those with two separate vehicles, but do those hopefully the same day, but certainly the same week, to give some assurance to the American people. The Repeal Plus plan is really all about trying to put in parts of the replacement in the tool known as budget reconciliation. It's our concern that it starts to really bog down in the details of the replacement more so than the fact that we made a campaign promise. President Trump made a campaign promise to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and so it's more of a focused approach on trying to make sure that we're good to the American people and fulfill our campaign promises. So
from the study committee's perspective, Representative, is it an idea of repeal and replace that's synonymous, or could it take place in stages? What would preferred stance that your group would take?
What we're asking, what we're moving for, if you go back to the fall of 2015, in preparing for fiscal year 2016, the House passed some kind of Obamacare repeal, but it only repealed 6 of the 419 provisions. When sent over to the Senate, they actually rejected and put some real teeth, some real appeal. What we're asking for is to get back to that baseline, making sure these federal mandates, 70% of the members have been elected on the Republican side, running on promises that they would do a full repeal of Obamacare. We're just wanting to make sure that we fulfill those promises to the people.
Back to the original thought, as far as these perspectives that you on affordable, how does that mesh with leadership's view of what should be done as far as repeal and replace?
Well, I believe they've been on a journey as well to figure out something, probably the most monstrosity piece of legislation that we've seen in our lifetime. This is a very complex situation. I've said a couple times, it's like having a couple children. You have one child goes into one bedroom and destroys the bedroom, but you hold that child responsible for fixing everything. That's what Republicans have to do right now. We hear there is some kind of plan, a Repair Plus coming out. We want to just show some urgency to fulfill these promises, to make sure that a genuine repeal is on the books, and I think the best place to start is the budget reconciliation that we passed for fiscal year 2016.
So from that perspective, from using the terminology, is that a yes and a no in your book as far as what leadership might respond to?
I think leadership has a different tactic right now. The Repeal Plus that they're talking about is not that we necessarily disagree with some of the things that are going in there. From my conversations with the upper chamber in the Senate, the plus part becomes very problematic getting it passed, and even with a Republican majority of 50 to 51 votes. So what we're looking at is trying to make sure that we repeal it and actually get that done. We should put on the president's desk no less than what we put on President Obama's desk, and so in doing that, if we do that, everybody's taking a vote in the Senate, and anybody other than just the new freshmen that are coming in has taken a vote in the House. So we need to put that on the president's desk. If we do that, then we can focus